people talk a lot about, the media talks a lot about the interest rate. The interest rate
Yeah.
it's only one metric on the entire spreadsheet built. I mean, these underwriting models are extremely complicated. And
Yeah.
the interest rate is one line. And so people get caught up on the interest rate, but it's kind of how it all ties together. So it's looking at, the debt structure overall. So your rate, but also the length of your term. Is it a fixed rate? Is it floating rate? Do you have a prepayment penalty? All of that, what's your leverage? There's all kinds of things that go into it on the debt side that, people people didn't have to pay as much attention to when you were getting a 2 or a 3% interest
3%.
rate.
Are you looking to achieve massive success in your life without dealing with costly investment nightmares? If yes, then this is the podcast for you. Here, we provide engineers and busy professionals all the secrets and strategies to create multiple streams of income, build generational wealth, and live a meaningful life by design. Here's your host, Ted Patel.
Welcome, Decoding Cash Flow listeners. Today we have pleasure to bring you Jason Balara. Jason is a CEO and co-founder of Lark Capital Group. Prior to Lark, Jason was single-family home investor with construction background and focused on small multifamily rentals and fix and flips. In addition to real estate investing, Jason is an experienced veterinary surgeon and hosts a Know Your Why podcast. Welcome, Jason. Thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ted. I'm really excited to be here. Looking forward to it.
Yep. Did I miss anything about you?
No, that's perfect.
All right, great. So, Jason, let's start with your journey. How did you begin into real estate? If you can just give our listeners some background.
Sure.
Yep.
Yeah. So, sort of high level. I've been doing, some level of construction, residential type, fix and flips, a lot of live-in flips, things like that, really since I was essentially a teenager. And a lot of it started out as out of necessity. I knew I wanted ownership. I knew I wanted to own a home. So it was always kind of with that goal in mind, even when I had no money to be in any position to own a house. I knew I kind of wanted to. So I was always had that goal in mind. And ultimately, the only way to achieve that was through doing things. Now we have names for it, like house hacking and BRRRR, but I was just kind of doing those out of necessity, having roommates, having using real estate to kind of grow. I don't even know that I was growing my wealth at that point. I was really just paying bills and having a place to live. I think it was more of that. I guess in the long term, it certainly did grow wealth. And then about 3 years ago in 2020, honestly, a lot of people, I think, came into the pandemic and used that as a time to, sort of reassess where they were at. Me getting, sort of moving from residential into multifamily syndication had nothing to do with the fact that the pandemic, which just kind of timing wise happened about the same time. I had just basically kind of run out of projects and was deciding what I wanted to do from a real estate standpoint. It had always been a part of my life, but also at that time in 2020, I had my son was then approaching 1.5 years. And so I wanted to be home more. I was looking for something that, kind of was not quite so, not necessarily less active, because I am active in my real estate investing, but looking for something that was not location dependent, like being a surgeon is. And so started digging in, and I came across multifamily syndication, and it seemed like just it really made sense to me as a way to scale and be more of a, kind of in that CEO role over being, sort of the DIY guy, which I had been most of my life and had served me well, but it also takes up a lot of time. So I just really started to kind of switch my mentality or my mindset as far as what was really important, and time has become more and more important, even more so than the money associated with it. So so 3 years ago, got into multifamily syndication, did a mentorship, and since then have been lead sponsor on 230 something units, and also invested as an LP in a number of deals, the self-storage joint venture. So I'm kind of just been as opportunistic as I possibly could during that time.
Your story just resembles similar to mine, actually. I started with fix and flip back in 2012. After doing some fix and flip, I started doing single family ground up construction. Yeah. And we also do currently, small multifamily construction as well. And around in 2018, we started looking at multifamilies too, out of state, the large multifamily, the ones that you're doing. So yeah, so same approach, almost the same line of work.
Similar journeys. It's I think it's a kind of a common story, but I think, if I had a time machine, I wish I knew about multifamily syndication in 2010, 2012. That would have been a great time to get in the market, but it is what it is.
You might have more than 5,000 units by now in the belt if you started at that time,
Be in a different position entirely. But you know what? We don't have a time machine, so here we are. Figure it out as we go.
Yeah, just go along, work along, and things will happen.
Yeah,
sooner or later.
Exactly.
Yep. So that's great. So are you still a vet surgeon, or?
Yeah, I do. I probably spend, in terms of time spent, I spend more time on real estate, probably, 60, 40, 70, 30 in favor of real estate at this point, in large part just because I own my own veterinary surgeon business, and I have built it such that is really, really very efficient, and my technicians do literally everything except for the surgery. So my involvement at this point is really just kind of to show up and do the surgeries, see some consults here and there, that kind of thing, be a point of contact for the vets that we work with. But it's not, doesn't actually take me that much time out of the day. So I'm able to spend a lot of time in terms of looking to acquire new deals, working on asset management, all of that stuff that I'm doing in real estate. So they go surprisingly well together, I guess.
See, as long as you can allocate some time to real estate, it's the best thing. High ROI on time, real estate. Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And you said you focus on multifamilies now. What markets do you focus on in multifamilies right now?
Mainly, I'm focused on Atlanta, and that's shifting. But the reason is, when I started, I was, I think, kind of too spread out. I was looking at virtually any market where someone would send me a deal to look at, or just being on all of the email lists. So it was like Atlanta, the Carolinas, Texas, just kind of everything. And I think that taught me how to underwrite. I underwrote a lot of deals, but what I think is really important in this space, especially from the perspective of an asset manager, is making sure that your team, unless you're local to that market, making sure that your team is essentially self-sufficient. They can run on their own, and you're there just kind of to pull the strings that need to be pulled when they need to be pulled. Almost like a on an not an emergency basis, I guess, but in the scenario where you want to be able to sort of anticipate problems and build systems and put them in place to handle those problems without you having to run to the phone or fly out, or whatever the case may be, at a moment's notice.
Yeah.
So that's why I've really stuck with Atlanta specifically, until I got to the point where I felt like my team there was really pretty self-sufficient. And the reason why I say that's shifting is because now I do feel that way, and I'm starting to kind of open up the search and think about doing that same thing in other markets.
Are you located in Atlanta or maybe nearby?
No, I'm in Los Angeles.
LA. Oh, wow.
Yeah. taking a lot of red eyes across the country.
So how did you find your first deal in Atlanta? Like, because as you said, like you already had a team over there, someone whom you know, or?
Yes, sort of. So I mentioned I did a mentorship. My mentor invested a lot in Atlanta, so that helped kind of start that process. I also currently my assistant, I used to work with her here in Los Angeles, and she left and moved to Atlanta. And when she was here, she was a doctor's assistant, and she was excellent at it. So again, some of the parallels that come in here in terms of skill sets and relationships are surprising, but she has turned out to be just as good as an executive assistant as she was doctor's assistant. So she lives in Atlanta, and I had been, as I was exploring markets, I had connected with property manager in Atlanta, and that's actually how I found my first deal. He and I had looked at a bunch. He would go to them first, give me expense ratios, send me some pictures, videos, that kind of thing, kind of let me know his perspective on the deals that I was being sent. And then if it was worthwhile, I was, kind of fly out there and take a look. And this was kind of early days, but at one point he contacted me and said, "Hey, I have been talking to a broker about this particular deal," and he said, he introduced me to the broker and told me that he thought that I'd be a good fit for the deal. So getting that sort of warm introduction from someone who is local to one of the brokers was, I think, extremely important. Went through that process, and then once we got that deal under contract, people talk about the law of the first deal, but it's really true. We hadn't even closed the first deal before we got our second one under contract. So it's just, once you start to show that you are, sort of willing and able to close deals, and you can speak intelligently and you have a business plan, people will start to believe that you're serious. And so it got, when you first start out, finding the deals is probably the hardest part. But once you close a couple, that becomes very easy. And then it's time to, easy is not the right word, that becomes a lot more readily available. And then it's time to start, honing in on some of the other stuff. So yeah, the first deal was actually through property manager.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's the thing, right? Network referrals, sometimes it helps a lot.
Exactly.
And it's always, first deal. Once you close the first deal, the other starts flowing in, because they know you can close, you can deliver, and you establish that rapport with the brokers around the, And okay. And what part are like in multifamilies right now, right? Any specific segments you are mainly, you take care of?
Like what class are we investing in? Is that what you're asking?
No, I'm talking about the business process, right? As you say, acquisitions.
Oh yeah, sure.
Investors' relationships. What exactly are you more focused on?
At this point, I'm mainly focused on asset management. I did do a lot of, as I mentioned, a lot of the acquisition at the beginning. For people starting out, acquisitions is kind of a good place to get in, because you may not necessarily have a lot of capital at your disposal, but if you can find a good deal, you'd probably be able to find some people to partner with and kind of bring you along in that deal. So it's a good starting point. Lately, like I said, I've been mainly focused on asset management. We're still looking for acquisitions, but it's just in the current market, deal flow is a lot slower than it was a year and a half ago. And also, I think the pricing expectations between buyers and sellers haven't quite, sort of settled out. And I think I really personally think it's going to come from both sides, right? Like as buyers, people are going to have to say they might be willing to accept slightly lower returns than they previously had. They're going to have to come up with better business plans, or more dialed in business plans than people might have, 3-4 years ago. And on the seller side, you're going to have to realize that, not only have interest rates risen, the insurance in a lot of places, insurance has gone up a lot, and taxes have gone up a lot. And those are, essentially your two biggest line items on the expense side of the equation. And so there are some significant contributing factors to why, we might be far apart on sort of deal pricing, and you're just not going to get the same rent growth that people were counting on, even 2 years ago.
Yeah, during the COVID times, right? It just went like 20-25% in some areas.
Right. Yeah, we're in rent growth, we're probably back to, kind of whatever is normal, which is, about 3 to 4% a year. So you just can't count on that, rapid rent increase to save your business plan. You got to really be dialed in on that side.
Yeah. And the thing is, right, as you said, we are also experiencing the same thing for multifamily. Still the gap between the cap price as well as the interest rate, it's not coming any closer. Once seller starts to realize, the gap, and once the property is in the market for some time, maybe, we might see some price reduction, I hope, in the multifamilies, and you can underwrite the deal properly.
Yeah, exactly. Like I said, I personally think it's going to, I'm not an economist. I don't think we're going to see this massive crash. There's far too much demand. And I do think it's going to sort of meet in the middle, because I think also, we've gone a long time without a lot of deals closing. And so there's a lot of dry powder on the side. People, your money sitting in a savings account is not better than a lower yield real estate investment. So it's kind of like, at some point, people are going to want to put their money to work, and it's almost like a reset, I think. But I think pricing will come down to some degree, maybe not what we saw in 2008, 2009, 2010, but probably to some degree.
Yeah. And the thing is, right, as you said, people might, the buyers might go for a lower return. So it's better to get a lower return than sit on the side, because there you always have a chance of, refinancing the property at the lower rate once the rate goes down, and that might increase the cash flow.
Right. Yeah, exactly. People have to really understand what their investment thesis is, right? If they're right now, sort of what was happening a couple of years ago with a 18-month to 36-month, complete repositioning of a property and selling it for twice as much is probably not going to happen. Like, it's probably, unless you get some completely vacant, some huge value add deal, it's probably not really likely to happen. So, I think it's a shifting of business plans.
Yeah. Oh, and what are the main factors that you keep into consideration when you underwrite the deals? You have been writing a lot of deals, right? So what are the most important as of the current market? What are the things you consider?
I think that it's all very market specific, right? So, what I might think about in my underwriting in Atlanta might be different than what someone might think about, underwriting a apartment complex in Phoenix, say. But I think at this point, in sort of my opinion, is the debt structure. People talk a lot about, the media talks a lot about the interest rate. The interest rate it's only one metric on the entire spreadsheet built. I mean, these underwriting models are extremely complicated. The interest rate is one line. And so people get caught up on the interest rate, but it's kind of how it all ties together. So it's looking at, the debt structure overall. So your rate, but also the length of your term. Is it a fixed rate? Is it floating rate? Do you have a prepayment penalty? All of that, what's your leverage? There's all kinds of things that go into it on the debt side that, people didn't have to pay as much attention to when you were getting a 2 or a 3% interest rate. It's like, basically, I mean, people talked about, it's like free money, because it really was like free money. But what they didn't worry about maybe in those instances was, you've only got a year or 2 years of this free money, and then you got to figure out what to do next. So the debt terms to me is extremely important. The ease of, I guess this doesn't go in the underwriting, but it's something to keep in mind as an underwriter, is the ease of working with whatever lender you're working with. So an example of what I mean here is, if you're looking at rolling your CapEx budget into your loan, which is typically going to be with bridge debt. But if you're rolling your CapEx, you want to know, kind of what the ease of working with that lender is and getting those draw funds in a, sort of quick and efficient manner, because a lot of those bridge lenders now are making it very difficult to get your draw funds that you sort of assumed would be simple. And there are some lenders that it still is simple. And so that those, I think it's what has stuck out to me is the understanding of that whole debt structure, and it's not just an interest rate issue. But in terms of underwriting, it's recognizing what your property taxes are going to be. I think in certain markets like Texas and Florida right now, insurance is a really big deal because those prices are jumping like crazy. So it is hyper local, but overall, tax assessments, especially because a lot of these properties went up quite a bit in terms of their sale price, the counties are trying to capitalize on that. And so if your annual tax payment goes from, and this is an example, but it's not an unheard of example, like from 100,000 a year to 400,000 a year, like that's a big difference. And you need to know when that's going to happen. And certain counties, like in the counties that we're in, around Atlanta, they do a reassessment every 3 years, but I think it's in North Carolina, it's around Charlotte, like it's every year. So knowing when that is and what the expectations are for that jump, like it's every 3 years in Atlanta, which is great, especially if you purchase a deal right after it was locked in, you might get that rate, but then you need to know in year 3 your tax payment might triple or quadruple, or whoever knows what the difference is going to be. So you have to be prepared for that. Otherwise you're going to be in big trouble to suddenly have to come up with like a tremendously increased tax payment. So I think it's just taking a real close look at the numbers, but the structure behind the numbers, I think is maybe, if you're looking at your business plan and you're saying, I'm going to renovate X amount of units per month, and it's going to cost me this amount. Like personally, I would tack on 10 to 15% buffer in your cost. And maybe that's going to take you twice as long as you think to renovate these units, unless maybe you own a construction company and you can plop a whole crew of guys at there, and you're going to, but it is increasingly hard to sort of execute the business plans versus where it was, a number of years ago, in my opinion.
No, absolutely. When you said put 10 or 15% of buffer, that's what we do all the time in our construction, because being a construction guy, it always goes, little above what you had planned. So that's good. Yeah. And you focus on mainly A class, B class, C class. What kind of properties you focus on?
The deals that we have in Atlanta right now are C class.
C class.
Going forward, I'm more looking to stay in the B plus, A minus range, in large part for, well, 2 reasons really. I want larger. I think that there's, what people say about, the efficiency, bigger is better in multifamily. People talk about the economies of scale. It's true. There's economies of scale. I think what's almost become a bigger impact there, and that for me is seeing that the margin for error, the more units you have, and by error I mean vacancy, whether it's economic or physical vacancy, you have. I'll give you an example. Like we have a 70-unit apartment and we have a 90-unit apartment. There are issues, especially around Atlanta. I don't know if it's in other counties, but there are issues with evictions. The counties are way behind on evictions. So the economic vacancy, when you're that backed up on evictions, goes up, right? So, but if you have 70 units and you say have 10 people under eviction, but you have 90 units and you have 10 people under eviction, that's a pretty dramatic difference in the actual amount of cash that is missing. It might, that's not true. It might be the same amount of cash that is missing, but the amount of cash that it takes to operate those two properties is not very different. And so now you have an increasing percent or increasing margin for error on the larger property. So if you have, you know, a 400 unit apartment complex, well, and now 10 people are not paying, who cares? I mean, you care, but it's not going to impact you financially the way it will on the smaller properties. It's like when people talk about, you know, if you buy residential and you have a single family home and someone moves out, your vacancy is at 100%. So it's not 100%, but it's dramatically increased those percentages. So I just think, for me going forward in terms of what we're focused on, it's going to be B or, you know, B class like 1985 or newer, and definitely over 100 units. I think, you know, sort of bigger is definitely better, and newer just because old plumbing, old electrical, that sort of stuff. It's unless you're going to get those C class units or those C class properties at a really big discount, it's probably not worth the amount of work that I have to put in to get them turned around versus, you know, something that's newer and nicer.
And the construction cost has gone up, right? If you have to replace all the plumbing, electric, you know, it's going to cost way a lot than what it used to be before, a couple of years before COVID.
Yeah. And I think that's one thing where my construction background has really, really helped me on that sort of asset management side and the construction management, is it's like, you know, knowing what years they used certain types of plumbing, knowing what years they stopped using stab lock breakers. Like there's a lot of little things that go into it that you can see on the front end while you're looking at deals and evaluating if this is worth buying. You know, hey, I'm going to spend, you know, twice as much on this in plumbing repairs as I would on, you know, at this 1970s property as I would at a 1995 property. It's just, it makes sense, right? It's older. You know, you're going to have to fix these things more frequently. They're going to break more frequently.
And also, like, it's not only electrical, plumbing, any value add property. If you need to replace the flooring, kitchen, anything, once you have a construction background, you know exactly not exactly, but I would say about a round number how much it's going to cost you. Like, okay, bathroom 5,000, kitchen 10,000, 8,000. Right. You know, around the number. So exactly. It always helps. So Jason, what about if you can give our listeners a little bit insight on any of the good or bad deals? Let's start with the good deals. What is your best deal till date? And then we can talk about, you know, what was the deal that went south, or, you know, and how did you, you know, try to protect that deal?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, the how do we protect it, I think is an ongoing ongoing question to be answered. But I think in terms of good and bad, I would say that I don't know. I guess I don't believe that it's necessarily black and white, good deal, bad deal. You know, once you exit them, you can put a number on it. But ultimately, like, you know, a few years back, people were getting tremendously high returns, like, you know, in the 20s for IRRs potentially in a short period of time, which is great, makes it look like a great deal. But again, were you just riding the market, and did that help you through? And if you did, good for you, awesome. Like that's not a disparaging remark. Right now we're in a tough time, and I think, you know, I was talking to one of my mentors about this recently, and she was like, if you can exit with a 14% IRR, like, do that. That's amazing right now. And I'm like, sure, that's great. But I think what makes it a good deal, I think I already sort of mentioned in our, you know, between our 70 and our 90 unit deal, a lot of the frustrations are the same, but our ability to weather the storm because we have more units has made, to me, at this point, made that the better deal. I guess I would just say, like, it's easier to turn that corner when you have a larger number of units or a little bit more, despite the fact that we've had some, we've spent some significant money on CapEx. It's still like at this point, best performing. Worst performing, I would say, is the smallest deal, that 70 unit. And the reason I say that in large part is, again, it's the same thing, like with the counties being so behind on evictions, the fact that we have economic vacancy because we can't get tenants out that aren't paying, it just hurts the performance. So it hurts the ability to give distributions and things like that, right? In terms of how do we manage that stuff, well, you've got to be human about it, right? So you've got to be human about it, and you've got to stay within legal compliance. So it's not like I can just go personally take people out that aren't paying. So we have, on that end, we have to work through with the counties and do everything that we can. How do you, I think the question really is, how do you weather the storm? And I think you do that by pivoting and adjusting your business plan. Like I'll give you an example of that. Like we went into these properties with the intent of really high level renovation, like put in washer dryer hookups, granite countertops, like really nice renovations. But when you're faced with diminishing cash flow because of economic vacancy, and you're realizing that maybe that's a little bit, it's not the time to completely reposition a property from C-class residence to A-class residence. It's location aside, it's just the timing of it right now with people's financial situation doesn't make sense. So, kind of changing your approach to those renovations, seeing what is truly desired by residents coming in, seeing what makes the most impact in terms of your ability to lease at a certain rate, but also speed. Not necessarily just achieving the absolute highest rent you can, but getting people in there that are paying and good tenants in a short period of time. So we've done some of that. We've been, I've heard a lot of, struggles that people are going through. And I think in a lot of those comparisons, we're doing okay. We're not distributing right now. We're trying to hang on to that, any additional cash flow to keep as reserve until this storm passes. And I don't like that personally. That doesn't feel good. I really like sending distributions to the investors, but I think in the long run, it's the better way to go to be able to continue and execute your business plan and not get into some significant financial trouble and then have to do like a capital call or something like that. So I think no distribution is certainly better than capital call. It's just, I would love to be sending out checks to investors.
It's better for the investors in the long run,
Right.
Some of the investors might not understand, but short-term pain, long-term gain. That's what it is.
It's education and communication. I think even the investors that don't understand, it's kind of talking to them about why, it's almost as simple as, well, would you rather me distribute to you this month and then 3 months I have to ask for some money back? Like it just doesn't necessarily make sense, as you said, in the long term. So it's just a matter of getting to a point where interest rates have at least stabilized. They may not go back down to 2 or 3, but they've at least stabilized. The fear that is out there in the market starts to subside, and then you can either move to exit the property, refinance, whatever it is, get to a more stabilized position. You just got to kind of hang on and do what it takes to stay in, a functional position.
Absolutely. So Jason, you said you also run a podcast, right? Know Your Why.
Yeah.
So that word, know your why, that's the basic building block to reset your mindset, to plan your strategies and your goals. Let's talk about know your why. What do you think? Like, if anyone wants to dive deep into himself, like, get an insight on how to find the strong why, what would you say?
That's actually a great question. I always ask people on my podcast, what is your why? But the ability to figure out what your strong why is that's probably even more important than what it actually is, right? So
Yeah.
you have to, I'll say this is could be like a hours long philosophical question, probably, Ted. But the reality, I think, is you have to find something that motivates you so much that you would do anything for it. And so I will give you my why has evolved, but at the very base, the very most basic, it is my family, and especially my kids, because so before my kids were born, I worked a ton. I still work a ton, but like I said at the beginning, like I've sort of shifted how I work so I can be around my family more. My wife was and still is very accepting and supportive of what I do from a working standpoint. But I wanted to be around them more. And so when my kids were born, it was a shift in what will I do? Will I do anything for them? And that's the truth. And so whenever I have a hard day, and like they happen a lot now that we're in this difficult market cycle, you're faced with kind of new challenges all the time.
Yeah.
But it's a matter of anytime I find myself feeling like I don't feel like doing this. I don't want to get on the phone with this vendor. I don't want to get on the phone with this investor. I don't want to go out there and film more podcasts, whatever it is, right? Yeah. Anytime I feel like that, if I feel myself sort of getting down, I can say, like, truly, I'll think to myself, what wouldn't you do for those kids? And then it's like, all right, pick up the phone, get back to work, like whatever it is. Like it just makes it makes it easier to face the hard times without giving up or whatever, just it allows you to do what you need to do, because sometimes what you need to do is not enjoyable.
Yeah, it's all about discipline, right? Get up,
Yeah.
No matter how whatever the environment is, you have to get going.
Yeah. I think a lot of us are not necessarily, you might think that you're self-disciplined, but sometimes you need that higher purpose or the why to even kind of push beyond that level that you were at before. Because I thought I was self-disciplined. I thought I worked hard before I had kids, and then I was like, oh no, I need to create something bigger and also have time for my family. So it was there's been some definite shifts in terms of mindset and how I approach just my day.
Absolutely great. All right. So, Jason, we almost running out of time. So, maybe before we move on to the final round of questions, right? Is there anything that you would like to share with our listeners? Any specific strategies, insights, anything?
I think I would say that, this just piggybacks off that, knowing your why and having that, the sort of mindset shifts that I think it takes to get, sort of to accomplish something big. And it really just comes down to remove the option to quit. Right. So just if you say, when you start something like this, you set your mind on it, just say to yourself, okay, there is no option to quit. So what do I need to do? Right. It's like you're thrown in a in a very deep hole and you can't swim. You got to get to the edge no matter what.
Yeah.
And so it's just kind of that same thing.
Yeah. Just change the question, right? From I can't to how I can.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. That's exactly right.
Yeah. So, Jason, final round of questions. Are you ready?
I am ready.
All right, let's go. So, which is the one book that have changed your life or your business?
I would say there's kind of two here, but I'll give you the one that I think is most relevant to now is Who Not How. It's the title is pretty obvious what it's about. Yeah. But from a guy who was always a DIY guy and thought, I just got to do everything myself. That'll save me money. I'll do it better than anyone else. But all of that same stuff that every DIY person thinks, I guess. Who Not How has done a lot to help me shift that mindset and try and really focus on what is the best use of my time. And also, like, there's a lot of people out there that are better at things than me. So finding out who they are and putting them in the right places, or partnering with them, or whether it's, you know, the hire or partner or whatever it is, it's, you know, I mean, it's like my marriage. Like there's things that my wife does that if she wasn't there, would fall apart. Like I literally would not know what to do. And it's, you know, but at the same time, like, she doesn't really know how to handle our finances and things like that. So it's just kind of like but that's okay. Like I don't have any problem with that. Like knowing your roles and finding someone who can complement your strengths.
Yeah. And similar to the book that you recommend, right? It goes in line with the similar concept, the IMIT, which also focuses on how to not work in the business but work on the business. That's good.
It's very true. It's a common theme again across sort of successful entrepreneurs is sort of figuring out a way to empower the people around you and kind of remove yourself from certain positions so that you can focus on what you do best and what helps your business run best.
Absolutely. All right. Any situation that you would like to describe which you overcame with a very strong mindset?
There's like a million things I'm thinking of, I guess, but I mentioned to you, my podcast is called Know Your Why. Obviously, mindset is an important thing to me. It's a big concept, a big topic of discussion on the podcast. But I'm very much an introvert and uncomfortable being a podcast host. So the idea
doesn't look like.
The idea, go watch some of the first episodes. The idea of starting that podcast was literally to get myself out of my comfort zone, realizing that a big part of this business is networking. And I know it's a little bit cheating if I'm sort of networking virtually, but it's still, it makes me do it. And it also gives me that sort of, as I said before, like that warm introduction, so that if I'm at a conference and I now meet someone in person that I had on my podcast or I was on their podcast, you're not starting from scratch. So I would say that that's something that had to be a really big mindset shift for me. And I still get nervous sometimes doing my podcast. I definitely get nervous going on other people's podcasts. I think it's something that'll probably always be there. I'm very uncomfortable in the large, like conference type settings. I see people on social media showing how amazing all the fun that they're having. They're like, this is great. They're all my friends. I'm just not that guy. Like, it's hard for me. So it's forcing myself to do things like that is probably a really good example of the answer to your question. There's probably a million things, but I think that one's most applicable here.
Yeah. Getting comfortable being uncomfortable.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
All right. So next question, second last question, actually. In what way would you like to give back to the world?
Great question, and a very, I guess, timely. I love charitable work. We always try to give back to some of the charities that we support. I've done Big Brother Big Sister before. I feel like probably I got as much out of it as the young man who's no longer a young man. He's out of college. So there's stuff like that. I love doing it. But one of the things that is sort of currently very near and dear to me is I'm a veterinary surgeon. I told you that. There is an organization called Not One More Vet. And what that is it's dedicated to the fact that there's an extremely high suicide rate amongst veterinarians. So one of the highest, if not the highest rates in professionals, like female veterinarians are 3.5 times more likely to commit suicide than a sort of the general population. So it's a problem. A mentor of mine committed suicide at one point. And so it's things that are within our field, sort of known. And so I am launching a fund. By the time this comes out, the fund will be out, but I'm launching a fund and we'll be giving 25% of the profits from the fund to Not One More Vet. So that is right now sort of front of mind from a giving back perspective. But that's kind of why I do all of this. When I went to, I guess not this year, but the year before, I went to the Best Ever conference, and I just love listening to the really successful guys give their talks, and they're no longer talking about like units, assets under management, number of units. They're like, this is what we do with our charitable foundation, and this is where we got to this point of just impact. And I'm like, I remember thinking like, I can't wait to get there. And then since then, over this last year, I've very much been like, I'm not going to wait. We're just going to make it a part of the growth. So, sorry, long-winded answer, but that's where I'm focused on from an impact right now.
Yeah, that's the really awesome job you're doing, man. It just changes life of so many veterans, right? So that's great. And now the final question: how can Decoding Cashflow listeners get in touch with you?
The two best ways: one, email jason@larkcapital.com, or Instagram, I would say, or LinkedIn too. Instagram or LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on both, and on Instagram it's @Lark Capital, and just Jason Balara on LinkedIn. I have a Lark Capital page on LinkedIn, but I feel far more active on the my personal LinkedIn page.
Nice. Sounds great. All right, listeners, don't forget to check out Jason. Go to his website, connect with him on LinkedIn, Facebook, wherever you can find him. And thanks a lot, Jason. Thanks for being a guest on the show. It was a pleasure talking to you today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on, Ted. It was great. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Decoding Cashflow, brought to you by Aster Capital. If you found value in this episode, then please share it with someone who you think could benefit from it. And make sure to act on what you've learned. If you want Ted Patel to personally help you reach your goals, then feel free to set up a one-on-one call with him. Also, visit us at astercapital.com for more free resources. Content of this podcast is for informational purposes only. As always, please consult your own advisor before making any investment decisions or setting a course of action. Thanks again for joining us on this episode of Decoding Cashflow, and we'll catch you in the next episode.